Then I'm put through these one-on-ones, going to talk to my boss's boss, writing it down on paper. What happened? What did you say? What did that person say? Now go have a one-on-one with that person who said the foolish commentary in front of another person just so that they can try to moderate it. All these people being white people, and I'm the only one who's really hitting it on its head, you know what I mean?
The sharp division of people into two main groups.
I wake up every morning in a house that was built by slaves.
I said, please don't be too nice.
Said, harassment, I'll show you harassment.
This is your police department in review.
We cannot settle for anything less than transformative structural change.
My perspective, right, is really going to be rooted in the fact that my grandfather was the late Honorable K. Leroy Irvis. He was the first African-American Speaker of the House of Representatives here in Pennsylvania. And as such, you know, people talk about preacher's kids and things like that, like the granddaughter of the first black anything, especially when it comes to politics and in a small town like Harrisburg, that definitely shaped how I would have interpreted systemic racism at an early age, very early age. You know, I was very, very much aware of color, black, me, what in a room of 15 other kids, and being, I was very well aware of what that meant at a very early age. From junior high school, middle school, SWAT era, junior high school, I remember my mom being very angry, going in and talking to teachers because she felt they weren't challenging my sister enough. They were just kind of letting her coast by in the lower level courses. I called out my 9th grade AP English teacher and called him a racist and got ISS for it. I attended when my grandfather was alive. He passed when I was halfway through high school. We attended a lot of celebratory award receiving events. I was maybe 10 when they dedicated the Irvis wing to him in the Capitol complex. So I knew that all of these things were huge deals, and the biggest part of it was because he was black, simply because he was black and did what he did, made all the difference. So yeah, I grew up in an elementary school knowing that there was only 10% black kids. But growing up with predominantly white friends, systemic racism was a home conversation, not one held in my friend groups or in school even. I was the black girl that everyone said talked white growing up in school, and it was words that were intended to hurt and most times did hurt, but again, the conversations that I was having in my home, you know, I felt equipped to still go back out in the world and be myself, even though there was hurt that came along with that, inflicted from people who had the same skin colors as me. That was just a part of growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood, I think. Code switching, though, is something that you learn to do pretty early as a young adult, as a black woman. I think a lot of things just came naturally to me because of the way that I spoke at home and how that was aligned with the dominant culture or professional culture of how you communicate with boss or colleagues, things like that. But it's funny, as an adult thinking of code switching, it's getting harder as an adult because I want to be more and more myself. I'm more and more of myself, of my true self. Code switching becomes harder. I work in a small team in a bank, so there's only a handful of employees, and there's one other another person of color, a woman, and I'll often find myself like switching back out of the professional tone and dialect and saying things that are slightly inappropriate maybe, or might be perceived as such from someone who doesn't understand the context. So it's a beauty and a curse. You get to have, as an adult, you have those bonds, but the curse is that your other employees don't really understand it. It can be seen as, some people receive it offensively. But code switching is important. I think it's a part of success. I think it's a narrative that Black people in America just grow up with. It's going to be a part of their narrative, whether they lived in a predominantly Black community or not. I've been doing a lot of reflecting, right? We've had all this time on our hands to reflect and really understand ourselves, like to have these conversations internally. And as I was telling a story about my own experience of systemic racism to someone as an adult, that's when I remembered, like, oh shoot, actually, I do remember doing this at a younger age in the 9th grade when I called out my AP professor. I don't remember the context. I don't remember the content that we were working with at the time as an English class, but I know that I felt confident and comfortable enough to call him the R word, racist, at the age of 15 maybe, and I got ISS for it. And they called my parents, and my parents they made me apologize. Being disciplined or punished or forced to apologize, which happened more than once, I was able to really probably develop a larger level of empathy for my own ancestors, for my own mother, who's way more passive of a person than I am, right? I don't think it necessarily taught me to be silent. If anything, it infuriated me more so that I'm still speaking up when not asked to. Specifically, when not asked to, I'm still speaking up. And younger generations, you can see it now in these protests. Generally speaking, there seems to be a higher level of anger, a higher level of emotion, just what might be felt as or seen as destructive levels of anger or emotion or energy, compared to marches of years past, right? Those peaceful ones. I think that, as a younger girl, having to do what I was told and apologize or not speak up to certain people or certain moments, I was just better able to understand, all that my grandparents and my parents sacrificed for me to be able to have platforms to solidly stand on. I think it's my personality too. As the way that I experience systemic racism, I always thought it was a thing that you were supposed to speak up for yourself and push back, and that's necessary. So that's what I continue to do. As an adult, any job I've had, I've experienced it. Every job I've had, I've experienced systemic racism. I started off in Philadelphia working in AmeriCorps programs, specifically City Year, North Philadelphia, one other person of color on a team of 10. 99% of the students are Black, not Hispanic, not Asian, Black. 99% of these kids are Black, K-8 school. And we're in January, and I bring up Black History Month planning and proposals, and people are asking questions like, when is Black History Month again? The adults on the team who are working in the school. And questions like that arise, and you just saw me chuckle. Like, I can't help but giggle at ignorance, for me, that seems to be at that level. Like, to me, it's the very basics, like, that we run into these conversations with. And again, I have to go through some sort of disciplinary processing after voicing my level of frustration and level of care. After expressing my level of care in response to the lack of care of teammates, then I'm put through these one-on-ones, going to talk to my boss's boss, writing it down on paper. What happened? What did you say? What did that person say? Now go have a one-on-one with that person who said the foolish commentary in front of another person just so that they can try to moderate it. All these people being white people, and I'm the only one who's really hitting it on its head, you know what I mean? So I know that people aren't ready to have these conversations. Even the people who say they're ready or are put in positions where they must be ready, they're not really ready. because it's marked as disciplinary, and like that's the world that they're comfortable having these conversations in my experience. That happened with my first job. Another example of systemic racism in my adult professional lifetime, as an adult and a professional, I moved to New York City to work for a nonprofit on Wall Street that was getting Black and brown low-income students into and through college. I was working with the college team, so working with college students across the country, Black and brown and low income, New York City, born and bred kids, right? So we're talking like Black and brown, all types, Caribbean, from all countries, a lot of immigrant families. That was a team that, I mean, the employees were it was a high turnaround, but nonetheless, it was not led by people of color. I mean, the CEO, yes, the two top positions were held by two Black men, but when it came down to programming and speaking to the kids one-on-one, again, you have all these white people who care and have some degree of empathy for any human being, but are they really able to go anywhere below the surface to solve actual problems? Like, not just here's some aid, financial aid for this, financial aid for that. Try talking to this person, try talking to that person. No, like it was a Band-Aid solution. But I enjoyed working there. We were doing good work nonetheless. Move forward to moving back to Harrisburg. It's a whole nother ballpark. When I say people who claim to be ready or want to be ready, and they're just not. Like, I could not have those conversations here in Harrisburg, especially not in the professional world. Again, turns into disciplinarian and a disciplinary issue, and I lost a job over my speaking against systemic racism. I literally asked questions at an event. Panelists were selected to sit on a panel and talk about diversity, talk about prime companies in the construction world and subcontractors or smaller diverse businesses. How could we create a better pipeline to get these diverse businesses on these large scale changes that are happening, economic development, growth changes that are happening in the city. And when asked directly about including Black and brown people at the table, at the head of the table, and at all levels, I was met with grief and defense mechanisms, and people's guards went up, and months later, I'm forced again to go apologize in front of a crowd, and just, humiliated for speaking against. And I didn't even speak against it. I asked a couple questions in a space that was meant for questions to be asked. But it really does matter who's asking the questions, who is being asked the questions, and how many people are in the room. I've learned that those are the top three factors when determining how systemic racism is really going to have a real impact, like losing income or jobs and things like that. But that is really what's on the line. Our jobs are on the line. Our peace of mind is on the line. Our day-to-day happiness levels are on the line. And, systemic racism, I think that white people should know that after work every day, Black people go home and we vent. We have to vent because there's no space to do it at work. And a lot of it is venting on commentary or things that have to do with the way that we, people of color, are treated in the workplace throughout the day. One might be, I think probably the most common one is stuff to do with hair. For example, I remember one time I went to an event and it was an event. It was with people who I've seen before, who I've known before, and who've seen me in different styles as far as fashion is concerned. And the one individual came up to me afterwards, a high-profile individual in the community, a white man came up to me and reintroduced himself to me as if we had never met before. And I was like, and I responded by saying, oh, well, I'm Elyse Irvis. This is my title. Remember, we met on this one particular occasion, and I've seen you since then. And he was like, oh, all bamboozled. He said, what, are you working for the Secret Service? I can barely recognize you. Or no, what, are you in WINSEC, Witness Protection Program? Am I in the Witness Protection Program? Because that's how well disguised I was that day by whatever style my hair was. And it's like, okay, commenting, oh, nice hair, new look, I like the new style. What is asking about questions, cool, but to, in a professional setting, address another colleague, can you imagine being told in front of other people, asked if you're in the Witness Protection Program, like the things that would imply? That's one example of microaggression. A lot of times, I work at a bank, another example of microaggressions. People asking for your boss, asking for the next person, asking for I'm a business banker, so when someone wants to talk business, they rather talk to our branch manager. However, my branch manager has never ran a business in her life. She wouldn't know the first thing about starting up a business. I would. That's another microaggression I experience often. What I will say in regards to the conversation on black male bodies versus black female bodies is that it's an attack on both right now. It's a pandemic for both, for the entire black family, the children. And I will say that, patriarchy exists in all cultures, ethnicities, and races, that the patriarchy does exist, but I don't think that it's a conversation that I want to highlight at a time like this. Like, I try to avoid those traps. I think it's a trap set by non-people of color to have us chasing our tails. Who's doing the killing more? Are we killing our black people are killing? To me, that's the easiest scapegoat. That's one of the most common scapegoats that I'm seeing on social media. People responding with, well, once you all stop killing yourselves, then you can worry about these few incidences of police doing it. Or, why aren't you worried about the killings in your own communities by your own people? Words like that, phrases like that, I'd rather not entertain it. So I want the questions to be asked to white people, honestly. I get frustrated having to field so many questions. I would want to see, what I have seen is white people at least standing. They at least stand. But I need to hear words coming out the mouth. Like, I need to hear concepts being connected. I need to hear white people connecting the dots themselves, rather than asking someone of color to reiterate what they've probably said to that person like a million times by now. To me, the biggest thing that has stuck out is that I hear a lot of people saying, well, it's a good start. Well, this initiative, this event, this conversation on racism is a great start. False. We have been having these conversations, and whoever is saying those things probably has had those same events in years past. But now, because that's all they've known to ever do, they're just repeating it and calling it a start. I need for every single person, especially white people, to be more, to acknowledge at a higher degree the fact that they started by not starting. Like, don't look at this period of time as some new revelation. No, nothing. It was one person's death. That was one man. George Floyd was one man. So to simplify or pacify the conversation by saying that we're starting here, starting today, it's disrespectful. I want people to have more conversations around the economics of color. I don't think we're having enough conversation on the economics of it. For example, one person came to me asking if I thought it was a good idea for them to initiate a brand new Facebook page to collate information on Black businesses. And that was so infuriating to me, because how could you possibly allow your mind to think that Black people and Black business owners never thought about that it must not exist if you're not in it, or that you can't seem to find it, so it must not exist, let me create one. We don't need it. The Black community does not need aid. The Black community does not need people to do something for us. We're not looking for help. We're not looking for some sort of temporary support. We're looking for integrated changes, like systemic changes. We're looking for new legislation. We're looking for new positions, new diversity positions in companies that didn't have one before. We're looking for more white people to talk about Blackness in America at the dinner table, at home with their kids. We're looking for Black parents, Black mothers to attend African American festivals, to go to the African American museums. We're asking for white fathers to, spend more time in the schools, volunteering on the teams, on the sports teams. Those are the conversations. That's what I want. That's what I want to ask. I want to throw out some terms like disinheritance, the divesting of communities, disenfranchising of people. We talk about displacement of people. Religion is a huge part of that. African Americans were displaced physically. Religion as an institution was created to further distance, to further discipline, and recreate structure and values. I had someone the other day ask, do Black people prefer people of color to be called people of color? I see people using some new acronym, BIPOC, and when asked, someone told me that I remember that I is Indigenous, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And I wanted to think, how dare someone create some simple lettering like that when, it's not LGBTQ. Don't try to make it like something or are more comfortable with. POC is a phrase, people of color. It's not a P is a thing, an O is a thing, a C is a thing, and let's throw a B and I on there too. No, we don't. There are so many different stories, and there's so many different identities that exist in communities of color. And historically, all those identities, that has been leveraged to disenfranchise the group, us as a whole group, because of that mix of identity. Whether you're Afro-Latino, whether you're, African American, white Cubans, things like that. People who live in South America and aren't Black or brown skinned, but they're not white. And just the whole diaspora of people of color. Economically, we've been at a loss. Economically, we were disconnected from our larger communities, right, that we would have been able to identify with. So in my efforts, I was reading a book, and at first, when I moved back to Harrisburg, I was spreading myself so thin. I was volunteering with this organization, sitting on this board and that board, and then I realized, no, this is what the enemy would want. They would want us to be spread thin that way. We need to consolidate and condense and unify more so, in a sense. There's way more value in that. It's way more efficient. It's way more effective, and no business will be successful without the Black dollar. The Black dollar holds more weight than the Black community really knows. And none of this information is taught. It's all word of mouth. So if you didn't have parents who not only came home from their jobs experiencing microaggression, still had enough gumption to talk about those in a way that it was passed down in a healthy way to their children, not just hate, not the anger of it, not the further suppression of it. You wouldn't learn it, you wouldn't know it. So if we can just continue to have more of these conversations and bring it back to economics, to how are we spending our money, and holding the people that we do work for, those companies, our employers, holding those people accountable. So I started a business called La Cultura. La Cultura is a space. It's a space for us, by us. The tagline is franchising the disenfranchised. And I recognized that identity was a huge part of the disenfranchisement of people of color. That's why I named the business. That's why I named the space La Cultura. It's in Spanish, for one. It means culture. It means identity. It's a place where like identity folks can come and unite and connect. It's where identity can be highlighted through art or event-like gatherings, through fellowship. It can be celebrated. And there's education in that too. It's a space for Black people. You know, my Black colleague the other day asked me, why do they call themselves Afro-Latino? She's like, I mean, I know what Afro means. Obviously it has something to do with like African. She's like, but there's white-looking Latinos. Like, do Afro-Latinos think they're Black? Or, you know, all of these conversations. You're not gonna ask your white boss or your white colleague who, again, never had these conversations at home, let alone read it in a book somewhere. So I feel really confident. I feel really proud that was something that I got off the ground 2 years ago this summer. For all this to be happening now, you know, it's proof that the conversation didn't just start, that we're not just starting here, that George Floyd didn't all of a sudden show the world racism still exists, right? It always has, and it's always felt, but now America has no choice but to join in the conversation because communities of color are recognizing and understanding more and more so, day by day, really now, the value of their dollar. I mean, I lack words to describe the level of importance it is to understand the historical context here. I do lack the words there because you won't understand it without some sort of historical context. You will not be able to analyze or create logic behind why all these people are just marching in the streets, protesting, rallying week after week. You won't understand why we want to defund police departments across the entire country. You won't understand it. It's not understandable if you're not able to connect the historical pieces, because we're talking centuries. And like I said, we're talking a lot of identities, not one group, not one country's. It's very expansive, you know. And I have some educational background beyond my own grandfather and upbringing in the home. I went on to Syracuse University and studied intercultural communications, international relations. I'm bilingual. I lived 6 months in South America, primarily white South American countries, which was an experience all of its own for an African-American woman. But again, I learned the history of those countries while there, and even more reason why. Like, and if I hadn't been going to school there and just visiting, you know, people go into these countries, they stay on the resorts, the nice, pretty, secluded areas, safer parts of the cities. You're raping that country. There's no way you're going to get the historical context. You know, you might take a book along with you and read up on it or check out their newspaper that day, that week. But being able to be immersed into someone's culture, it really does simultaneously mean the history of that culture. So, yeah. People aren't going to be able to connect the dots, and maybe that does speak to why the level of ignorance, because I'm still trying to figure out, I can't for the life of me understand the level of ignorance and naive and grown adult people who lived through the civil rights movements today still can't understand why people still feel that black people don't have the same civil rights as others in this country.